Chapter 34. Underneath the yellow and red falling leaves of the deciduous trees, Lady Eve waited beside Thalin while Thistle stood back with a straight face. But the boy pushed himself away from the Baroness and threw himself into his father's knees.
"Dad, this isn't fair!"
He smacked his fist against Thistle's thigh.
"Don't leave me behind!"
Thistle knelt to be level with him. "This has to be done. The lady will care for you." Thalin shoved against his shoulder as hard as he could.
"You said I wasn't to trust anyone except you and Mama. Anyone! You don't know her!"
He jerked his hand at the Baroness. His father's orange eyes didn't flicker. "Thalin, after this, we'll go wherever you want, to whatever mountains or oceans you want to see. I promise." The boy sniffed back his tears.
"Why can't I go with you now?"
"Because I am going somewhere dangerous." Thalin inhaled again.
"More dangerous than the river?"
He puffed up his chest.
"I wasn't scared."
Thistle held his gaze evenly. "And I am proud of you. You're getting big now, so you're ready for the truth." He paused, but didn't look away. "We're going to Darkrain." Thalin's eyes exploded wide. He grabbed his father's shirt.
"But you said we were never to go there, never ever!"
The Kelin grimaced. "I know. But after this, we'll be free. No more Kelin or elves, just you and me." He rose and spun the boy on his heel. "Now you see this lady?" Evelyn smiled and curtsied. His father pointed over his shoulder. "I need you to watch over her and keep her safe." Thalin whirled back around.
"No! Why can't I go with you? I can fight!"
The elf chuckled, and the sound drifted over them like leaves playing on the wind. "He's been listening to Derora Saxen again."
"That's right!"
Thalin exclaimed.
"Dara's going! It's not too dangerous for her!"
"Dare isn't 6 years old." Evelyn took the boy's hand. "Come along, Thalin. We can watch them leave after you have a proper meal." He tugged, but her grip was strong. She pulled him down the open corridor.
"Dad, don't leave me! Dad!"
he screamed. Thistle hung his head and waited until the sounds of yelling and footsteps faded. He spun on his heel and raised his fist to pound the wall when he saw the sentries watching him. They had been silent and in the shadows all along. But they said nothing as they followed him. He marched toward the courtyard that Jacob told him was being used for training. As he came around the final bend, he heard, "Close your eyes." "What?" Dare backed away and swung her sword between herself and Feenan. "I said close your eyes," Jacob grinned, shoulder resting against a tree. "You're watching him more than you're relying on your instincts." Behind him, she heard Selinian chuckle. Ahead of her, Feenan remained stern and on guard. She fought herself as she dropped her eyelids. She felt her entire body tense. Her arm shivered as she pushed her blade out blindly in front of her. She hit nothing. Her eyes shot wide open. Feenan hadn't moved at all. The elf looked at her impassively. She forced herself to shut her eyes again. What was he doing? She stood unmoving until she realized how stupid that was. But how could she fight without seeing anything? She waited, but nothing happened. Then she saw the near-complete blackness of that Kelin cell underneath the old castle as her memories surged up. She gasped and shuddered, trying to block it all out. "Focus," she told herself. What would an opponent facing a blind person do? Thrust, probably straight. Ergo, she should parry. Her blade met his with a jarring crash. She almost opened her eyes. His sword must have been waiting for hers. After a parry, a swordsman should riposte. She brought her blade toward him. He parried, and she was ready to counter his immediate riposte. She thought she was getting the rhythm after a few minutes of sparring. Then she disengaged her sword from his and stabbed low. Fianan's blade countered hers easily, but she took satisfaction in that she tried. Her stance was awkward, she was too slow, and she was barely shifting her feet. As they trained, she often missed his blade or caught a bad angle on a parry. The awkwardness and strain continued to increase until she had to start moving her feet more. Then her blade work fell apart as she concentrated on her footing on unknown terrain. But the lesson didn't stop, and she kept her eyes mashed shut. Her body felt about to drop, but her mind was more alert than it had been. She learned to sense the pressure on the blade and how it betrayed the opponent's next move. The swordplay stopped. Dare remained ready, just in case. Something smashed into her chest, and she caught it with her left arm. Wetness was growing across her shirt. Her eyes shot open. When she looked down, she saw she was holding a water skin. "Not a bad catch," Jacob commented. "But always be on guard. And drink up." She tried to focus on him, but her gaze slid to the figure standing back by the trees. She stuttered, "Thistle? How long have you been here?" "Long enough." She glanced at Fianan and Selinian. Both had stiffened and were holding their swords almost on guard. "As promised." Jacob raised a hand toward the row of weapons. "Thistle, if you would." The Kelin nodded and walked over. Jacob looked up to the two trailing guards. "And you're dismissed. If we can't trust him now, we certainly can't trust him below." "But sir," a guard started. "Silver Dawn business." Jacob grinned as he raised a hand. The guard scowled. "But we are in Indeliria's territory." "In that case, please go ask the prince to clarify your orders if you're unsure." "We will remain here, sir." Jacob's smile froze behind a slight grimace. But then he turned back toward the raiding party and let his gaze settle on Kelin. "Your turn." He rolled his face toward Thistle. "And yours." Kellen's eyes flickered between the storm reader and Jacob, but he sighed and picked up his sword. He stopped near the center of the courtyard. "You're not going to make me fight him blind, are you?" Jacob shrugged. "You can if you want to, but I wouldn't recommend it." Dare watched the Kelin drill her friend into the dirt by advancing, retreating, and circling. The young man stumbled around, panting heavily. Thistle was quick, zipping about him like a hummingbird. Kelin had paled underneath a sheen of sweat. He tripped, but still managed to keep his sword between himself and his opponent. He staggered, only to have Thistle kick out his ankle and then tap his collarbone with the blade. Kelin coughed but nodded and stood back up. As they drilled, Dare tried to keep track of how many times he'd taken the flat of the blade, but she lost count. "Enough!" Jacob clapped his hands. The Kelin withdrew and sheathed his weapon. Dare tossed Kelin the water skin and offered a conciliatory smile. Thistle stepped back. "There's a simple counter to that sliding thrust." Kelin raised an eyebrow but crouched his shoulders. "Just shuffle your feet back when you parry." Selinian folded his arms. "I did not expect that a Kelin would train a human to kill his own ilk." Thistle's hand remained planted on his sword, but he said nothing. "None of that." Jacob turned to Kelin. "You have improved, at least since this morning. But we need to do so much more, and there isn't enough time." Fianan remained stiff. "Of course, if all goes as planned, we won't have to fight." Selinian kept his eyes trained on Thistle. "Very doubtful, I fear." "I am aware," Fianan replied. "And they have that quiet sword, damn them." Selinian made a face. "We melted it. I was there at the ceremony. So many of us were." Dare inched forward. "If the Kelin made this silent sword you've been discussing, and you destroyed it, why couldn't they make another one?" She raised her hands against their stunned expressions, and she found herself feeling a little homesick. They reminded her of the look she earned all the time in Riversbridge, just after she'd say something. Selenian blinked. But then it's not the thing to be feared. Even Jacob shook his head. It's not the same thing, Dare. It didn't commit all those atrocities.
Still, she pressed, if you can't tell any difference, is there any?
Once again, stillness surrounded the courtyard. Thistle's mouth twisted into something akin to a smile, and he nodded to her. We had not thought like that. Selenian bowed his head. Dare slapped her hands on her hips. And you immortals are supposed to be smarter. She immediately earned glares that soon cracked into smiles. A laugh tickled a throat, then another. The elves chuckled but looked away. Thistle's mouth twitched, which probably counted. Suddenly, an awkward silence snatched the training circle as they realized they were laughing together. Thistle backed up, and so did the elves. Kelin stepped back too, bewilderment splattered across his face. Just like in the meadow, convincing everyone to joust on plow ponies. She grinned. Feenan's smile began to fade. Well, I hope you keep such wit about you in the coming days. Kellen's expression froze. Dare, I don't want to do this. I think I'm a coward after all. Jacob's shovel of a hand landed on his shoulder. You're not, Kelin. I've been a soldier for a long time now, and being fearful doesn't make you a coward. You survived, with your wits intact, that which would make most men spoil their trousers at the color orange. Dare opened her mouth, but the knight waved to shush her and then looked back to Kelin. I've seen bravery and cowardice. I know who will be a coward. It's someone who runs away from something he can overcome. Now, for this raid, we don't know if we can climb this mountain. Being afraid but still willing to go doesn't make you a coward, Kelin. It makes you brave. The young man dropped his eyes. It's easier to sound brave when we're in this place. But there... Thistle approached. The Kelin are taught that fear is a weakness and pride can only be a strength. Both are untrue. Fear can be a weakness, but you can also train it to become a strength. Just something to keep you alert. Keep you ready. Kelin nodded. Thanks. You'll need your fear to survive Dark Rain. What's it like? Feenan inquired. He didn't keep eye contact with Thistle. Don't know. Jacob watched Thistle. I've been wondering how. In the banishment, it didn't matter where a storm reader was. Thistle shook his head. It may be a trick I need again. Jacob frowned but didn't say anything more. Beside him, Kelin shook his head ever so slightly toward Dare. Ha! Selenian wheezed. Since this one claims to know nothing of this realm, we are blind. Thistle remained impassive. From what I've learned in my spying at the outpost, is that the Kelin spent centuries conquering Darkrain and slaying its other inhabitants. They built their own kingdom, rebuilt their kingdom, including their cities, Zazakorma and Dari. And Zazakorma was the capital, I remember, Jacob murmured. Thistle nodded. And the streets may be the very same. Gods and lords, Feenan whispered. It will be like we've walked back through time. Jacob shifted his weight. Let's hope not. Dare coughed into her hand and looked around at everyone. This distraction. She ran her foot over the ground. Is this honorable? It's not like we're facing them on the battlefield. Jacob inhaled deeply and then blew it all out. You humans are certainly getting philosophical today. Feenan chuckled. Oh yes, like Palins, when you couldn't walk down the street without hearing an argument about truth or the divine nature of the world. You didn't answer my question, sir. Dare looked straight at Jacob. He sighed again. Fine. Dare, I won't try to sweeten war. Not after what you've already seen. But on the battlefield, we're in it for survival. And while our enemy may take prisoners, as you know, it's not for any honorable reasons. Her expression betrayed her disappointment. He raised an index finger. Honor is defined by what you do after combat. 'Cause in the fight, everyone's a bastard. If you aren't, you die. Pain crossed Dare's face. I just want to hear a yes or no. She bit her lip. But it's not that simple, is it? He shook his head. No, it's not. Don't dwell on it, though. I'm the commanding officer, so it's my responsibility, all right? Yes, sir. She kicked a foot against the ground. Do not worry about it. That's an order. He ran a hand over his face. There is honor in war, Dare. It helps to separate the good from the rot. But there are only rules when everyone obeys them. That's confusing, sir. He offered a weak smile. You'll learn. I know you will, 'cause you're too stubborn to do wrong. The knight nodded. Right. Now let's get you some proper armor. Selenian opened a footlocker beside the racks of swords to reveal 2 lightweight shirts of elven mail. They glistened in the sunlight like fresh waves over water. Jacob handed Dare a thin, red-brown sword belt with a blade in it. An intricate pattern was imprinted on the leather. She drew the sword. The blade was without a single nick, and it shone brighter than the practice weapon she'd been using. She looked between the sheath and sword, remembering what she had left home with. Her father's sword and a sword belt with length cut out of the back to make it fit. He hinted at a cold smile. You wanted to be a warrior, so here is a warrior's sword. The sun could have been behind Dare's head for the way she glowed, all fears and concerns tossed over her shoulder for now. Yes, sir!